Capitalism versus socialism. We can sum up each economic system in one line. Capitalism is based on human greed. Socialism is based on human need, right? No, wrong, so wrong. It's exactly backwards. And I'll prove it to you. Been on Amazon lately? Each of the thousands of products Amazon offers represents the work of people who believe they have something you want or need. If they're right, they prosper. If they're wrong, they don't. That's how the free market works. It encourages people to improve their lives by satisfying the needs of others. No one starts a business making a thing or providing a service for themselves. They start a business to make things or provide services for others. Now, I speak from personal experience. When I was the CEO of the company that owns Carl's Jr. and Hardee's restaurant chains, we spent millions of dollars every year trying to determine what customers wanted. If our customers didn't like something, we changed it, and fast. Because if we didn't, our competitors would, pun intended, eat us for lunch. The consumer, that's you, has the ultimate power. In effect, you vote with every dollar you spend. In a socialist economy, the government has the ultimate power. It decides what you get from a limited supply it decides should exist. Instead of millions of people making millions of decisions about what they want, a few people, government elites, decide what people should have and how much they should pay for it. Not surprisingly, they always get it wrong. Have you ever noticed that late-stage socialist failures always run out of essential items like toilet paper? Of course, this isn't a problem for those who have the right connections with the right people. Those chosen few get whatever they want. But everyone else is out of luck. Venezuela, once the richest country in South America, is the most recent example of socialism driving a prosperous country into an economic ditch. Now, maybe you think it's an unfair example. I'm not sure why, but okay. We'll ignore the fact that leftist activists celebrated it as a great socialist success right up until it wasn't. But what about Western European countries? Don't they have socialist economies? People seem pretty happy there. Why can't we have what they have? Free healthcare, free college, stronger unions. Good question, and the answer may surprise you. There are no socialist countries in Western Europe. Most are just as capitalist as the United States. The only difference, and it's a big one, is that they offer more government benefits than the U.S. does. We can argue about the cost of these benefits and the point at which they reduce individual initiative, thus doing more harm than good. Scandinavians have been debating those questions for years. But only a free market capitalist economy can produce the wealth necessary to sustain all of the supposedly free stuff Europeans enjoy. To get the free stuff, after all, you have to create enough wealth to generate enough tax revenue to pay for everything the government gives away. Without capitalism, you're Venezuela. In a 2015 speech at Harvard, Denmark's prime minister took great pains to make this point. I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. So when you point to Denmark as a paragon of socialism, you're really singing the praises of capitalism. The more capitalism, the less socialism you need. Look at America since 2017. A policy of lower taxes and less government regulation, that's more capitalism, has led to a robust economic expansion, something thought impossible just a few years earlier. Unemployment, notably among minority groups typically most at risk for poverty, is at a generational low. Economic expansion gets people off welfare and into work. That's less socialism. None of this requires a degree in economics. Common sense is all you need. That's why it's so frustrating to see young people praising socialism and criticizing capitalism. It's bad enough that they're working against their own interests. Better job prospects, better wages, personal freedom. But they're also working against the interest of the less fortunate. Capitalism leads to economic democracy. Socialism leads to the economic dictatorship of the elite. Always and everywhere. So beware what you ask for. You just might get it. I'm Andy Puzder, the author of The Capitalist Comeback for Prager University. Take a close look at this. Jonathan Haidt, the noted New York University psychologist, calls it the most important graph in the world. Why does he say that? Because he knows this graph reveals a simple, inescapable fact. There is no substitute for free market capitalism as a promoter of human prosperity. Let it be noted that Haidt is no one's idea of a conservative. But when hard evidence stares him in the face, he's not going to look away. The graph is based on the research conducted by the late British economist Angus Maddison. The numbers along the x-axis are years, 2,000 of them. The number on the y-axis are dollars, all of them, divided by the number of people on the planet. It's what's called GDP per capita, which is the world's economic output divided by its population. GDP is considered the best measurement of a country's standard of living, and in this case, the world's standard of living. Often when I show this graph to students, I get this comment: that's not capitalism, it's just the impact of the Industrial Revolution. So I show them another chart by the Madison Project. This one breaks the GDP hockey stick into regions. As you can see, there are a number of hockey sticks. But note that they don't rise at the same time. The United States surged first. Why? Well, in a very fortuitous coincidence, the year 1776 witnessed both the signing of our Declaration of Independence and the publication of a book called The Wealth of Nations by the Scottish economist and philosopher Adam Smith. In his book, Smith explained how to create a modern free market capitalist economy and the benefits of doing so. America's wise founders took Smith's principles to heart, and within a mere 100 years, the blink of an eye historically, capitalism turned the United States from 13 backwoods colonies into the world's largest economy, and it's held that position ever since. Western Europe shot up as well, but later. It rose steadily during the Industrial Revolution and then experienced a sharp rise after World War II when, between the end of the war and the mid-1960s, it fully embraced the free market. Japan too shot up after World War II, surpassing Western Europe for the first time, after the U.S. helped the Japanese transition to a democracy and a free market capitalist economy. Eastern Europe took off after it was released from the Soviet Union and socialism in 1991. China did likewise after the Chinese moved away from strict socialism and implemented some limited free market policies. One can only imagine where China would be now if its leaders had fully unleashed the forces of the free market. Yes, during this period of economic expansion, the wealthy got wealthier. That always happens when new wealth is created. But the middle class and the poor also greatly benefited. Here's another telling chart. This one is from the World Bank. In 1820, 94% of people lived in extreme poverty. Thanks to capitalism, by 2015, that number declined to 9.6%. Single digits for the first time in human history. Now, it's still too many, but if we're going to reduce the number even more, we need to understand what caused the decline. Free market capitalism. If we combine the Angus Maddison hockey stick chart and the World Bank data on extreme poverty, what we get is something quite amazing. Unprecedented global prosperity and an unprecedented decline in poverty across the globe over the past 200 years. That's capitalism in a nutshell. One more chart. Johan Norberg, a Swedish economic historian, shows us how well ordinary people do when they work in a free market economy. Since 1990, hunger, poverty, illiteracy, and child mortality have all declined significantly with the decline of socialism. This all happened while we added 2 billion more people to the world. Far more people, far less poverty, better health outcomes, fewer babies dying. That's what economic freedom, capitalism can do. President John Kennedy, a Democrat, said it best. While making his case for significant tax cuts in 1963, he said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." Kennedy didn't believe that the poor only get richer when the rich get poorer. He believed everyone could get richer with economic growth. History has shown that he was right. This whole capitalism versus socialism debate is backwards. It's not those who advocate for free market capitalism who need to justify their actions. Rather, it's those advocating for socialism or any form of it who have a lot of explaining to do. I'm Andy Puzder for Prager University.
This video was made possible by a generous donation from the Jaquish and Kenninger Foundation.
I own a small business with 7 employees. We make cookies, but not just any cookies. We make sugar-free cookies that diabetics can eat. Actually, they're so tasty, anyone can enjoy them. That was the inspiration that motivated me to start this business. You see, I'm a diabetic myself. I have been one my whole life. If you think running a cookie company is fun and games, think again. I work 100 hours a week, which isn't unusual for small business owners. I make a nice living, but I'm not in it for the money. I love what I do. I'd better. My margins are very tight, around 1%. That means I have to sell $1 million worth of cookies to make $10,000. Every penny counts, literally. That's why I get so frustrated with government regulations. Now let me be clear. Some regulations are necessary, especially for obvious reasons in the food industry. But necessary and excessive are two entirely different things. Excessive, unnecessary regulations soak up valuable hours of my time and my money for no good purpose. That 100 hours I work per week, I estimate 36 of them are spent on compliance issues alone. This keeps me away from activities that would help me grow my business, like sales and product development, and that keeps me away from hiring more people. My employees are like family to me. It's that way with most small businesses, but it's a struggle every single day. I could be more productive and feel a lot less anxiety if I didn't have to fight my own government. Or should I say governments, federal, state, and local. I get the roads and the bridges of the national defense, but I don't get why they have to be involved in every tiny aspect of my business, sometimes competing with each other as to who can make my life more difficult. For example, as a bakery, I'm under the jurisdiction of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, the Department of Agriculture, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I also have to deal with the State Health Agency. They all have different rules. If these rules contradict one another, it's not their problem, it's mine. A few years ago, the FDA inspector showed up for one of his random inspections. He noticed the door to the area in which we bake our cookies swung out as you walked in. He told me that was a code violation. The doors have to swing in. I had 30 days to fix it or I'd be fined thousands of dollars. I should note we have an air curtain between both rooms, so no food particles can get in or out of the baking area. I pointed this out. The inspector was unmoved. A few months later, the inspector from the Ag Department shows up for one of his random inspections. He notices that the door swings in. Yes, I tell him, it does. It's an FDA regulation. No, he tells me, it has to swing out. Fix it within 30 days, he says, or you'll be fined. I started keeping 2 sets of doors, one that swings in for the FDA and one that swings out for the Ag Department. Here's another example. The FDA requires bakeries to send a sample of every product batch to a third-party lab for testing. We make 36 batches a day. That means we have to send 36 bags of cookies every day to that lab. This costs me tens of thousands of dollars every year. And remember, in order to make $10,000, I have to sell $1 million in cookies. We've never had a bad test. Hardly surprising, making cookies isn't that complex. The ingredients are well known and safe. I'm all for testing, but how about 1 bag out of every 10 batches? That alone might double my profit margin to 2%. One more example. The government demands that the type on my packaging be a certain size. Fine. I hired a company that does this sort of work to do the printing. The inspector gets out his magnifying glass and decides the font is off by 1/100th of an inch. All the packaging has to be trashed and a whole new set ordered. That cost me $15,000 or $1.5 million in cookies to make that money back. Another time, we didn't include the word coconut in the allergy section of the package. We didn't think it was necessary as these were coconut cookies. All that packaging had to be redone too. That cost me $68,000 or $6.8 million worth of cookies to make that money back. I could go on. So could anyone who owns a small business. But you get the idea. Small businesses are responsible for 60 million jobs. We could be responsible for a lot more if the politicians who pass these laws and the bureaucrats who enforce them would back off. Common sense regulation, I'm all for it. Excessive, unnecessary, wasteful regulation? I need to get back to work. I'm Joseph Semprevivo, president of Joseph's Light Cookies for Prager University.
What's profit? And why is it so important to everyone, not just business owners and entrepreneurs? Here's a simple quiz. When you spend $100 on a new pair of shoes, does the shop owner get to keep that $100? The answer, of course, is no. The shop owner has to pay all of his business costs, employee salaries, inventory, rent, supplies, taxes, and a dozen other expenses. His profit is what's left over. It's his payment for the time and money he spent and the risks that he's taken to keep his business going. Thank goodness for profits. Profits motivate people to work hard for themselves and make life better for others. Take the example of Bill Gates. How did he become so wealthy? The answer is that he came up with something that millions of people so wanted and needed that they reached into their pockets to pay for it. His Windows operating system, Word software, and other Microsoft products. What's more, he produced these products in a way that efficiently used resources. And what motivated him, and just about every other successful entrepreneur, to work so hard? The answer is profits. Without the incentive of profits, why would anyone spend his savings, work countless hours, and take all the risks necessary to bring their product or service to the marketplace? There's a simple answer. They wouldn't. You don't have to make billions like Bill Gates. Take a Montana cattle rancher who goes out in the dead of winter, even in blizzards, to feed his cows, to keep them safe and care for them, making huge personal sacrifices so that New Yorkers can sit down to eat a nice steak. Why does the rancher do that? Do you think he does it because he loves New Yorkers? Of course not. The rancher tends to his cattle because he wants more for himself and his family. He wants profits. You can go to the supermarket any day of the week, and if you want steak, they have it. If you want potatoes, they have them. Sugar, salt, potato chips, strawberries, peanut butter, they have it. In fact, the average well-stocked supermarket in the United States has over 50,000 different items on its shelves. How does all that get there? It seems like magic, but it's not. Every one of those items is on the shelves thanks to one thing: profit. The same holds true for the device you're watching this video course on, whether it's a TV, a desktop or laptop computer, a smartphone, or a tablet, and for every component in those devices. They all exist as millions of other products we treasure and depend upon exist because of the profit motive. No profit, and it all goes away. Here's another reason the profit motive is so important. Ask yourself this question: which establishments do you tend to be most dissatisfied with? The answer is likely to be government agencies. Why? Because they don't operate for profit. So no one is rewarded for good work, and almost no one is ever punished for inferior work. And which establishments are you most satisfied with? The answer is likely to be the ones that operate on a for-profit basis. If I'm unhappy with, say, a department store like Macy's or Bloomingdale's because it's not providing me with the goods or services that I want, I can, in essence, fire that store by taking my business elsewhere. But consider a government agency like Department of Motor Vehicles or public schools. If I'm frustrated with their performance, I can't fire them because I don't have many alternatives. Business owners must please their customers or risk failure and bankruptcy. Government agencies risk nothing and therefore have to please no one. Am I saying we don't need government? That everything should be on a for-profit basis? Of course not. But what I am saying is that we should want as little government as possible. That's exactly what the founding fathers of our nation believed. They understood that the profit motive pushes people to do extraordinary things. Take that motivation away, and the world becomes a very different and darker place. I'm Walter Williams of George Mason University for Prager University.
Progressive politicians love to talk about raising the minimum wage. It makes them sound caring, compassionate, concerned. They're on the side of the worker standing against the greedy employer. The current call is for a national $15 an hour minimum wage, more than double the current federal rate of $7.25. A number of cities and states are already there, including New York, California, Washington, D.C., and Seattle. Others are considering it. The left casts the minimum wage debate as a war between employee and employer. But most business owners pay their workers as much as they can. Finding and keeping good people is the hardest part of any employer's job. I know. For 17 years, I ran CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Our company and franchise restaurants employed over 75,000 people. But as with most retail businesses, our profit margins were razor thin. Based on my experience, if we adopt a national minimum wage of $15, here's what will happen. 1, a lot of people will lose their jobs or have their hours reduced. According to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office study, just a $10 minimum wage would cost 500,000 jobs as businesses terminate employees. Obviously, far more jobs would be lost at $15 an hour. To survive, employers would have to reduce hours even for workers who manage to keep their jobs. That's a pay cut. 2, businesses will close and the jobs they created will disappear. A recent report from researchers at the Harvard Business School found that each $1 increase in the minimum wage results in a 4 to 10% increase in the likelihood of restaurants closing. An over $7 an hour increase to $15 would be devastating, not only for restaurants, but for small businesses and their employees. 3, young people will lose that entry-level job opportunity. My first job was scooping ice cream at a Baskin-Robbins in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s. Now, it paid just $1 an hour, but it taught me valuable lessons like the importance of showing up on time, teamwork, and presenting a happy demeanor to customers. No one can get that better job until they have their first job. 4, the cost of all workers will have to go up. If you hire a dishwasher at $15 an hour, your cooks will be unhappy with their wages. You're going to have to pay everybody more, which increases labor costs across the board. That's more pressure on profits. Too much pressure and you're out of business. 5, fewer people will open businesses. $15 an hour is a very steep hill to climb. Would-be entrepreneurs will do the math on labor costs and realize it's just not worth the risk. This is a real cost to the economy that we can't measure. A company that never exists never employs anyone. 6, prices for everything will go up as businesses pass higher labor costs along to consumers. One of 2 things will happen. Either consumers won't pay the higher prices and businesses will lay off workers or close, or consumers will pay higher prices and have less money to spend elsewhere. Either way, the higher minimum wage will represent a drag on the overall economy. Now, this may sound like doom and gloom, but it's already a reality for many business owners and workers in the cities and states that are raising the minimum wage. In San Francisco, AQ, a 2012 James Beard Award finalist for the best new restaurant in America, saw rising labor costs drive its profit margins down from 8.5% in 2012 to 1.5% by 2015. So it shut the doors. Jeremy Marin's chain of Cuban restaurants in New York closed 2 locations because of minimum wage increases and has raised prices at the restaurants he's still operating. The minimum wage, he said, is going up too fast. We can't catch our breath. Kevin McNamee is a chiropractor in California. I'll be moving my 2 companies out of Los Angeles, he wrote in a letter to the New York Times. When the city compels me to pay employees $15 an hour, it comes out of my pocket. Last year, my employees made more than I did. Now, these stories are already all too common. Expect them to become more so as cities and states pile on the $15 minimum wage bandwagon. So, if a $15 minimum wage doesn't help workers and doesn't help employers, who exactly does it help? Well, maybe just the progressive politicians who manage to mislead voters into believing that it's the right thing to do. Sounding caring, compassionate, and concerned is all well and good, but having a job is better. I'm Andy Puzder for Prager University.
Let's discuss an important concept from economics, the Laffer curve. This concept is named after the man who developed it, Arthur Laffer, a major American economist who has taught at the University of Chicago, University of Southern California, and elsewhere. The Laffer curve illustrates the 2 most important things we need to know about taxes: how much money the government can raise from taxes, and at what level of taxation the government might start getting less, not more revenue. The Laffer curve is illustrated here by a 2-dimensional graph. The horizontal line is the tax rate that the government chooses, and the vertical line is the revenue that the government receives from that tax rate. First, because 0 times any number is 0, if the tax rate is 0, then the government receives 0 revenue. Accordingly, 0, 0 is our first point on the curve. Now suppose the government chooses a very small tax rate, say 1%. The government will then begin to receive some revenue from citizens. This means that another point in the curve must be something like this. Now suppose the government charges a 2% tax rate. Then everyone would agree that it will receive even more revenue, which means that another point in the curve must be something like this. And if the government keeps raising the rate, then revenue will continue to go up, at least when we're in the low tax rate part of the graph. This means that if we fill in the curve, it has an upward slope, at least when we're in the low tax rate part of the graph. Now suppose the government charges a 100% tax rate. If this happens, then no one would work. That is, why would anyone work when the government is going to take all the money that they make? And if no one works, then national income would be 0. This means that government revenue would be 100% of 0, or 0. This means that another point of the curve must be here. Now, let's complete the curve. When we do, we see that the curve must have a hump. That is, it could look like this, or this, or this. But it has to have a hump. This is simply because the revenue line has to go up in the low tax rate part of the graph, and it has to start going down to reach the point we drew at the 100% tax rate. But if the curve slopes downward, it implies something remarkable, something that few of those who push for higher and higher taxes want to admit. It means that when tax rates are high, if you make them higher, you'll actually bring in less revenue to the government. This has in fact occurred in practice. For instance, during the Great Depression, when Congress passed the Hawley-Smoot tariff bill, although the bill raised taxes on imported goods, the revenue that came from those taxes actually decreased. A more recent example occurred in the early 1980s. After President Reagan and Congress drastically reduced the tax rates on the rich, the tax revenue that came from the rich actually increased. All economists, even the most left-wing ones, agree that the true Laffer curve, the one that reflects real life, has a hump. And that therefore, the curve has a downward sloping part, meaning at some point, tax revenues start going down when you increase rates. So where then do economists disagree? They disagree about exactly where the hump occurs. When I took my first economics class in 1984 at Stanford University, the textbook said that the hump occurs somewhere around the 70% tax rate. But apparently, I was taught something wrong. New evidence from an unexpected source suggests that the hump occurs at a much lower tax rate, something around 33%. That source is a study by Christina Romer and her husband David Romer. Both are economics professors at the University of California, Berkeley. Christina Romer was the chairman of President Barack Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. In other words, the study was written by one of the most influential liberal economists in the United States, and it was published in the American Economic Review, the most widely respected economics journal in the world. The study examined how national income responds to tax rates. But as far as what concerns us here, the key point is that if you do the math, the results imply that the hump on the Laffer curve occurs where the tax rate is around 33%, much lower than economists previously thought. Let's now put these findings into political terms. They suggest that no matter what your politics, you should not want tax rates to be above 33%. Obviously, conservatives and many moderates think rates should be lower than that. But even if you are an extreme left-winger and your only goal is to make government as big as possible, you should still oppose a tax rate higher than 33%. The reason is that, as the Romer and Romer study suggests, when tax rates go higher than that, the government actually gets less money. Everyone of every political persuasion should pay attention to the Romer and Romer study and its important implications. They suggest that if we decrease tax rates, government revenues might actually rise. I'm Tim Grosclose, professor of political science and economics at UCLA for Prager University.
Tax the rich some more. That recommendation comes from many politicians. It seems obvious to tax the rich. We tell ourselves they won't miss that little extra bit we take, and after all, it's only right that they pay their fair share. The technical name for taxing the rich more is progressivity. And it's hard to oppose a concept that shares its roots with an optimistic word like progress. But this surface logic obscures some important truths about progressivity. So let's stand back. The first thing we see when we take our distance is surprising. It is that many people don't know what progressivity is. Supposing you pay $5 in tax on your income. A rich man pays $10 because he makes twice as much as you. This arrangement sounds like progress, right? But that is not a progressive tax schedule. It is a proportional one, a true fair share, what was once known as the tithe, but is now commonly called a flat tax. Under a flat tax, everyone pays the same rate no matter what they earn. In the 1980s, a poll by political scientist Carlin Keene suggested that Americans thought flat proportional taxes were fair taxes. And as we know from architecture and art, humans are wired to like proportionality. A progressive tax structure, by contrast, is actually disproportionate. Progressivity resembles a flight of stairs. Each individual starts out at the bottom paying the same rate, say 10%. When his income rises to a certain line, the taxpayer moves up the step on the staircase and his rate goes up to, say, 20%, but only for the share of income past that line. And the next step, the rate goes up again, say to 30%, but again, only for the last stair of income, and so on. But the prospect of going up all those stairs tires the climber. Surveying the rates at the top, workers stop chasing a promotion they once thought they wanted. Why bother? The taxman will take the money anyhow. When workers or professionals stall on the stairs, the government loses money. But so do regular people, for when the person who decides not to earn more money is a business owner, the result of that decision is a smaller company and fewer jobs for others. Of course, some people do keep climbing no matter what. Some people are wired that way. And those taxpayers can get to the point where they pay half of what they earn, especially in high-tax states, which leads to the greatest argument against the progressivity staircase. Progressivity is unjust. People have a right to what they earn, even Californians and New Yorkers. But politicians like being able to say that they are ensuring that the rich pay their share. And nothing proves their anti-rich credentials like sponsoring fresh legislation for more progressivity. So for years, president after president, Democrat and Republican, and Congress after Congress have passed law after law to make the income tax more progressive. President Richard Nixon signed a law that took 9 million taxpayers at the bottom end off the income tax staircase entirely. Other presidents like Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton took a few more million out. George W. Bush removed even more. So today, nearly half of Americans pay no income tax at all, and 10% of earners pay 70% of all income tax. Talk about disproportionate. Here we get to a genuine question of fairness. There's something wrong with our democracy when people who pay no tax can vote for tax increases on fellow citizens who already do pay tax. But reversing a century of progressivity won't be easy. For when you cut taxes for all in a progressive rate structure, the rich necessarily get a larger tax break. That is so because they pay a greater share to begin with. And advocating larger breaks for the rich is not a popular political move, to put it mildly. Many economists make the case for a true flat tax. Others tout a sales tax. Consumers would then pay taxes only on what they buy. Either way, it's time for politicians to give up their small talk about the earned income credit, the child credit, and so on, and get out their saws to dismantle the big staircase, our disproportionate progressive income tax. The country could then try a tax code that's simple and easy to navigate, like a new road that runs straight ahead into the horizon. Many of us would call that progress. I'm Amity Schlaze for Prager University.
The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. The top 1% of people on the planet have half the wealth. Western corporations are plundering developing countries. Capitalism is on its last legs. Really? The truth is that global inequality is tumbling. Yeah, the rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting richer faster. And what's driving that process? The market. Look at the most basic measures: literacy, longevity, infant mortality, calorie intake, height. More and more people are being lifted out of poverty. I think of the changes just in my lifetime. When I was born in 1971, an American worker had to earn a month's salary to be able to afford a TV set. Now it's 2 days. In 1971, fewer than half of girls worldwide completed at least primary education. Now it's more than 90%. In 1971, a stationary car emitted more pollution than a car moving at full speed today. Go a little further back. In the 17th century, the most powerful man in the world was Louis XIV of France. Every night he'd have 40 dishes prepared for his dinner, and he'd pick the one that he felt like. But think about it. A receptionist today can stop off at a store on her way home and have not only a wider choice than that king, but a fresher one and a healthier one. We all live better than Louis XIV. And what's caused that miracle? Not any UN development program, not any government aid scheme. What caused it was the market. The most rapid falls in poverty are happening in countries that are joining the global trading system. Compare growth rates in free trading Colombia and protectionist Venezuela, or in free trading Vietnam and protectionist Laos, or in free trading Bangladesh and protectionist Pakistan. It's the same story every time. China after 1979, India after 1991. You remove barriers to trade, prices fall, your people no longer have to work every hour just to afford food and basic commodities. They have time to invent and make and buy and sell other things. The whole economy is stimulated. Poverty falls. Okay, you might say. So maybe capitalism works, maybe people are better off. But isn't there a cost? Doesn't it make us more materialistic? Doesn't it make us greedier? Well, if by greed you mean a desire for material wealth, that's part of the human condition. It's in our DNA. Or if you prefer, it's in our fallen nature. Under any system, socialism, communism, fascism, absolute monarchy, theocracy, people want more stuff. The unique quality of capitalism is that it structures the incentives so that the way to succeed, The way to be greedy, if you insist on using that vocabulary, is to offer a service to the people around you. Under every other system, you get on by sucking up to those in power, commissars or kings or dictators. But under a free market system, you get on by offering consumers something they want. As the economist Joseph Schumpeter put it, the achievement of capitalism is not to provide more silk stockings for princesses, but to bring them within the reach of the shop girl. So, why can't we see it? Why do well-intentioned, idealistic young people oppose free trade and market liberalization, thinking that they're standing up for the poorest people on the planet, when in fact they're doing the opposite? A big part of the answer is aesthetic. As the Victorian novelist Anthony Trollope wrote, "Poverty, to be scenic, should be rural." I grew up in Lima, Peru, which in those days was surrounded by shanty towns known as Las Barriadas. Western visitors would come and they'd visit Machu Picchu, and then they'd ask in bewilderment why people migrated from the Andes to the slums. Why did they swap the clean air and the mountain scenery for open sewers and traffic fumes? It's a very first world question. No Peruvian ever needed to ask why you'd leave a place with no electricity, no school, no clinic, and no jobs. Those shantytowns, those barriadas, for most of their residents are transitional. They're busy places, humming with enterprise, and the people in them sense that they're on their way up. If we want to help those people, the best thing we can do is let them sell us their stuff. Capitalism has achieved things which earlier ages ascribed to gods and magicians. It's abolishing hunger and disease and want. It's led to an unprecedented enrichment that is the central fact of your life. The fact that you're watching this video is enough to tell me that. Now, let it work its magic in the rest of the world. I'm Daniel Hannan for Prager University.
Like the fair-minded progressive that I was, I thought a $15 minimum wage was an absolute good. Then I had a head-on collision with reality. It's a funny thing about reality. It just is. You can't wish it away. So here is my cautionary tale. For over 3 decades, I had a good job working as a server. I have worked in some amazing award-winning restaurants in Seattle. I enjoyed the work, met wonderful people, and I was making really good money. I wasn't making much per hour, that's true, but in my business, the magic is in tips. On a typical night, I would make on average $25 to $50 an hour. Believe me, I earned it. I took pride in my work. I wanted every dining experience to be a memorable one for my guests. I also loved my job for this reason. I had flexibility. I could plan my work schedule. That was very important to me because I had a growing son. It was a good life. Then, in 2015, the Seattle City Council raised the minimum wage from $9.47 to $15 an hour, a 58% hike. Great for the working stiff, right? Well, hang on, because here comes Mr. Reality. The business owner, the person who signs the checks, has to find a way to pay for this massive new expense. For Walmart or Microsoft or a large restaurant chain, this might not be a problem. For a local restaurant owner, it's a nightmare. Contrary to popular opinion, most restaurants don't have big profit margins. In fact, most are razor thin. Seattle restaurant owners, faced with this shock to their bottom line, raised prices, reworked their menus, and created new compensation models. Some did away with tips altogether, substituting a flat service charge as a way of navigating the climbing wage. That change in the tipping model caused a dent in my pocketbook. The rise in the wage did not cover the loss of tips. And, of course, they cut back on employee hours and support staff too. But for many establishments, none of these cost-saving measures worked. Restaurants, some that had been in business for decades, many family-owned, closed, including the ones I worked for. Good servers don't grow on trees, and I was able to score an interview at another amazing restaurant. Then, before I could even confirm the interview, that one closed too. Same reason. The $15 minimum wage cut their profits down to nothing. So let me add this up for you. I make a lot less money now than I did before Seattle decided to do what was supposedly in my best interest. I used to be able to pay my bills as they came due. Now it's a juggling act. I used to have enough money to support my son's extracurricular activities. Now I often just say no. Before the minimum wage increase, I had one job and worked 4 days a week. After the wage hike, I had 2 jobs and worked 6. With my skills and a tipping culture, I used to average 18 to 20% or more on any check. Now, instead of tips, I get a flat 14%, part of the 20% service charge the restaurant owner tacks on the bill. I still pride myself in providing good service, but the incentive to go the extra mile is gone. There is no way to maximize my income. And what's Seattle's answer to my problem? To raise the minimum wage again. The progressive idea is that you should be able to make a fair wage. But if you have no job or are working more for less, how is that fair? How is it fair to my friend who worked his way up from busboy to sommelier, the fancy name for the person who manages a restaurant's wine list? He lost his job when his restaurant closed due to the minimum wage increase. Or my former boss, who went from a cook to an owner and couldn't survive the double blow of the minimum wage law and the coronavirus. And it's not just a Seattle problem. In New York City, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour pushed the restaurant industry into a recession. To stay afloat, 75% of owners reduced employee hours and 47% eliminated jobs. San Francisco is in the same boat. Mandating minimum wage laws might be a winner for progressive politicians and ivory tower economists, but it's a loser for those of us who have to live with the consequences. Unless fair-minded people speak out, those consequences only figure to get worse as more states, and maybe even the federal government, succumb to the false promise of raising the minimum wage. I'm Simone Barron with the Full Service Workers Alliance for Prager University.
Is our economy a machine, like an automobile, a train, or a power plant? One constantly hears phrases such as, the economy is overheating, or needs to cool off, or could use some stimulus. These aren't harmless metaphors. They epitomize how economists have taught us to see an economy, as something that can be manipulated, guided, or driven. And guess who does the driving? The government. The government is supposed to make sure that the economy hums along at an even speed, going neither too fast nor too slow. But the economy is not a machine. It is made up of people, and no one can control what billions of them are going to do. What gets overlooked, underplayed, or simply ignored is the extraordinary churn in the activities of a free market. New businesses open while others close constantly. In the U.S. during normal times, 500,000 or more jobs are created each week, while another 500,000 are cut. Entrepreneurs continually roll out new products and services, most of which flop. But those that succeed can greatly improve our quality of life. What government can and should do is to positively influence the environment in which this hum of activity takes place through sensible taxation, monetary policy, government spending, and regulation. And in almost all instances, the best prescription for economic health is less is more. Catastrophic mistakes by governments can poison the marketplace, as happened during the Great Depression in the 1930s, to a lesser extent in the 1970s, and then again in the panic of 2008-2009. The government's recent mistakes have been compounded by tax increases and an avalanche of anti-growth regulations from Obamacare, the Dodd-Frank Financial Services Bill, and all those Washington regulatory agencies, such as the FCC, the EPA, and the National Labor Relations Board. If you want to understand why the American economy has been growing at the anemic pace of 1% to 2% a year, look no further. Again, the idea of an economy that purrs along like a well-oiled machine hurts, not enhances wealth creation, because invariably it leads to growth-retarding government intervention. Which brings us to bubbles. Shouldn't the government, the argument goes, at least try to stop them from happening? Well, it depends. Those caused by misguided government policies like the housing bubble of the mid-2000s? Yes. Those caused by the free market? No. Bubbles have a bad name, but not all of them are created equal. There are healthy ones and unhealthy ones. The good kind develops when a lot of people simultaneously recognize a great opportunity. Computers are an excellent example. During the early 1980s, there was a boom in personal computers, followed by a severe shakeout, when companies such as Atari and Commodore bit the dust. In the late 1990s, a number of companies recognized the importance of search engines. Google emerged supreme, with Microsoft and others relegated to fractional market shares. More recently, mobile phones went through its own shakeout, with a dozen different brands competing for market share. Once, Nokia was king, but now the Apple iPhone and Samsung dominate. Good bubbles are a sign of a vibrant and innovative economy. The excesses are ultimately squeezed out, and capital is redeployed to more promising opportunities. But bubbles artificially created by government policies, such as the housing bubble, are disastrous. The housing crisis was largely created by government policies, including pushing banks into giving mortgages to people who could not really afford them. When large numbers of those borrowers stopped making their payments, the market crashed and everyone got hurt by unnecessary government meddling. Finally, there are business cycles. Shouldn't the government smooth those out? Economists have puzzled over business cycles, the ups and downs of an economy, for more than 200 years. Most have treated the phenomenon like an illness, something to be cured, instead of what it is, the ebb and flow of the free market, where what people might want is created and what people don't want is destroyed. Trying to arrest this free market process of creative destruction, as it is known, inevitably leads to stagnation. That is, little or no economic growth. For current examples, see Japan and most of Europe. Here's a rule. The more a government tightens its grip, the less an economy grows. That's because an economy is not a machine and government can't force it to act like one. So, let's free the free market. That is and always has been the surest path to prosperity. I'm Steve Forbes for Prager University.
From left-wing Democrat to right-wing Republican, everyone loves infrastructure. We all want safe bridges, smooth roads, and world-class airports. So why can't we have them? Why are America's bridges falling down, our roads riddled with potholes, and many of our major airports dilapidated? Why can't the United States build or repair infrastructure like European and Asian countries do? The answer is not complex. America doesn't have better infrastructure because of two groups: environmental activists and labor unions. What has happened to the Keystone XL pipeline, a project to bring oil from Canada to refineries in the U.S., is a typical example. According to environmental groups, this vital piece of infrastructure is a guaranteed disaster. Never mind that pipelines are, by all measures, a much safer way to transport oil than rail cars. Say the words fossil fuel, and the Greens are against it. In November 2018, in the U.S. District Court of Montana, Judge Brian Morris, an Obama appointee, halted Keystone's construction for the third time. The first final environmental review approving construction was released by Hillary Clinton's State Department in 2011. It concluded that the environmental impact would not be significant. A second final environmental review also approved the project. It was released in 2014 by John Kerry's State Department and also foresaw little environmental impact. Judge Morris's third review may be the charm for the Greens. At this point, a full decade into the process, it's hard to see the pipeline ever being completed. Keystone is a case study of what Brookings Institute scholar Robert Kagan calls adversarial legalism, environmental reviews of every aspect of every public improvement. In a given year, the federal government produces 50,000 environmental assessments. Individual states and cities add thousands more. And this isn't new. A routine dredging project in Oakland Harbor, begun in the 1970s, wasn't completed until the mid-1990s because of legal and environmental challenges. 4 such challenges gummed up a water desalination plant urgently needed in dry San Diego. That process started in 2003 and was needlessly delayed for 12 years. Simply raising New Jersey's Bayonne Bridge roadway a bit to allow taller ships through, a move that had almost no environmental impact since it was merely an adjustment of an already built site, proceeded only after 5 years of review and 20,000 pages of environmental studies. Americans like to think of themselves as more freewheeling and less regulated than European and Asian countries, but when it comes to infrastructure, this just isn't true. Europe and Asia don't have the redundant layers of city, state, and federal bureaucracies that we do. As a result, their ideas get proposed, approved, and built in the time it takes us to agonize over a single environmental impact study. And to add insult to injury, their roads, bridges, subways, and airports are much cheaper to construct. A 2011 study by Israeli mathematician Alon Levy found that a mile of subway track in Japan or continental Europe typically costs $200 to $450 million per mile. Vancouver, Canada comes in lower than that. The Canada Line, a 40% underground rail system in a densely populated area, cost $130 million per mile. Even on the high end, London's underground Jubilee Line extension of the Tube, which opened in 1999, cost $640 million per mile. But in New York City, the 2nd Avenue subway, a 2-mile extension of an existing line, took 10 years and cost $2.4 billion per mile. And that's not an anomaly. The East Side Access Project, connecting Long Island residents to the east side of Manhattan, is set to cost an astonishing $3.5 billion per mile, according to the New York Times, which calls that 7 times the average cost in other cities around the world. Construction began in 2007 and hopes to wrap in 2022. 2030 sounds more realistic. Why is everything so expensive to build in the U.S.? Enter the labor unions. Their motto seems to be work slowly and charge more. Sometimes don't work at all. Workers from New York City's Sandhogs Union, which is critical to such projects, cost an astounding $111 per hour in wages and benefits, according to the Times investigation. A task that could be done in Madrid with 9 workers requires 24 in New York City, according to an estimate by the city's own Metropolitan Transportation Authority. It gets worse. An investigation of East Side Access construction found that roughly 200 of 900 workers on the underground project were being paid to do nothing. And such price tags and questionable union practices are not unique to New York City. In Boston, a simple Green Line extension of the light rail network that is being built on the surface, not underground, is set to cost some $530 million per mile. The result of all this? Americans are living in a 20th century infrastructure world. We can't build a 21st century one. The unions and environmentalists won't let us. I'm Kyle Smith of National Review for Prager University.
Venezuela, where I was born and still have family, bad. Cuba, bad. Zimbabwe, bad. Soviet Union, bad. China under Mao, bad. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, good. This is the socialist report card as it currently stands. Never mind that Venezuela, Cuba, Zimbabwe, the Soviet Union, Mao's China were once good. Once they go bad, they stay bad and are quickly forgotten, lost down the memory hole. But those Nordic paradises, they never let you down. Whenever Bernie, the squad, and the growing horde of democratic socialists ever get cornered, there's always, like Denmark, to come to the rescue. No, we don't want anything like what's going on in Venezuela. Denmark is what we have in mind. Except they don't. And it's time we all figured this out before it's too late. Here's what you need to know about Scandinavian countries. They are capitalists in wealth creation and socialists in wealth distribution. They have low corporate taxes, around 20%, no higher than in America. Unlike America, neither Norway nor Sweden nor Denmark has a government-set minimum wage. Most make it very easy to start a new business. Most have private health care and education options. Yes, the Nordic countries have an expansive welfare state, but everyone pays into the system. Rich, middle class, and poor. Nobody escapes the tax man because nobody escapes the 25% value-added tax. This sales tax, a tax on what you buy, is regressive, meaning it falls much more heavily, percentage of income-wise, on the poor and the middle class than it does on the rich. This concept is a complete non-starter for American socialists who want only the rich to pay more, even though America's tax system is already steeply progressive. The rich, the top 10%, pay about 70% of all income taxes. But for the socialists, it never seems to be enough. So, If the American left has rejected the Scandinavian model, which model is it embracing? Well, where do the leading figures of the American left, from Sean Penn to Michael Moore and Bill Ayers, go when they want to praise socialism? Here's a hint. When was the last time you saw Bernie in Copenhagen? First, it was the Soviet Union. Then it was Cuba. Then it was Venezuela. Venezuelan socialism, like current American socialism, is based on sowing social division. The left in Venezuela divided the country not merely between the rich and the poor, but white and black or brown, between Europeans, Africans, and indigenous people. Hugo Chavez made much of his black and Indian roots. Venezuelan socialists were bringing down statues of Columbus long before American leftists did. Once you establish the villain class, taking away their wealth is not hard to do. Whatever Chavez and now his successor Nicolás Maduro wanted, they took. Or, if you care about moral clarity, they stole. Always, like the French and Russian revolutions, in the name of equality. It didn't start out that way, of course. It never does. Chavez portrayed himself as a moderate in his early presidential campaigns. Expropriations came later. What Chavez and Maduro achieved at the end of a gun, the American left would achieve through extremely high taxation on income, wealth, and inheritance. But we shouldn't leave guns out of this discussion. In 2010, Venezuelan socialists started a campaign to disarm law-abiding citizens under the guise of stopping gun violence. They called it Desarma la Violencia. When citizens, now unarmed, began to protest the corruption and tyranny of the socialist government, Chavez and then Maduro unleashed a group of criminal thugs, the colectivos, to terrorize them. Their specific targets included small business owners, entrepreneurs, farmers, and clergy. There are no colectivos or Antifa in Scandinavia. Venezuela is now a cautionary tale. All the people you see on the news rummaging through garbage cans or standing in line to get food, toilet paper, and gas, those are the ordinary citizens. The country's leaders aren't missing any meals. The socialist elite, the so-called Chavistas, eat in fine restaurants and go on European vacations. Miraculously, it always works out that way. The American left keeps telling us they want to take us to Stockholm, but its policies point in the direction of Caracas. My birth country was once prosperous and free, but socialism destroyed it. Take heed, America. I'm Debbie D'Souza for Prager University.